Hey kids. Hello again. I didn't go missing, you went missing. Anyway, let's begin. Music is integral to humanity. For me, the two kind of go hand in hand. It's actually potentially the best thing about having a human experience, and I think a lot of people feel that way. Music is something that's so far beyond everything else that we experience in our day-to-day lives. When I listen to music, I start to piece together in my mind the kind of neurons and synapses that people need to believe in a god. Like, I'm there. The way that words and sound move me is such a precious experience to be able to live through in my time on Earth. And this experience feels very distinctly human. And that got me wondering, is music and humanity something that is innately linked? Was there ever a human on this earth that didn't experience music, or at least have a concept of it? But how accessible was music in the past, and what role did it play in the lives of our early human ancestors? Has it always been something innate in our experience of the world? Good morning, welcome to Fig Tree. And today we're going to be discussing the origins of music. I would begin by defining what I mean by music, but I should hope you've gotten this far in your life, having at least some kind of concept of what that is. As far back as 40,000 years ago, we have evidence for musical instruments being created by humans. Our earliest examples are flutes made from bird bones and mammoth ivory in what is now Germany, what was then like a forest and a bunch of rocks. The existence of tools like this make it clear that at this time, obviously humans were creating music, but had they always had the capacity to do so? Spoiler alert, I think yes. And I will go on to argue, in fact, that music evolved alongside humanity in such a deeply connected way that it's as much as part of us as language is. Going forward, I want to split music into two distinct factions because I make the rules. And the rules are music number one, i.e. the creation of harmonious sounds with external instruments like flutes, saxophone. And then group two is music like vocalization, like singing, made with the human vocal cords. Because there's quite a distinct difference between the two. We have instrumentation and vocalization. And I would say that one definitely preceded the other. It strikes me as highly likely that humans began to vocalize and sing before they began to manufacture items to accompany their voices. If we could create language, then obviously we can create song, right? But how far back are we talking? Because that wasn't always physically possible. Human vocal communication has evolved like a lot, and it's evolved to contain some very unique features that a lot of other animals don't have. Number one, voluntary control of our vocal cords. So control of our vocal cords is very important for speech, precise speech. In most non-human primates, vocalizations are generally reflexive or involuntary. They can't learn new sounds with the precision that humans can. Number two is a flexible vocal repertoire. Humans can produce a very wide range of sounds. If you think about like other animals who kind of just say the same thing over and over again, if you can hear the birds out of my window, then that's an example. They're kind of just saying the same over and over again. But we can manipulate our vocal folds and our tongue and our lips to create all different kinds of sounds. And this allows us to create phonemes. It's the smallest possible distinct sound that can be made, and all of these phonemes together create language. T, b, p, k. Those are all phonemes. We can create those. Other animals have trouble doing that. It also gives us control over things like intonation, rhythm, pitch, tone, which are essential for speech and song. Yes, exactly. And number three, the ability to learn and/or imitate vocal patterns. This is the way that human children learn to speak. They mimic what they hear in adults. Most non-human primates do not have any of these abilities. Zero vocal control, zero flexible repertoire. They don't deserve phonemes. That might be sad for them, but it's actually good for us because this lets us know that at some point in the evolutionary line, because we came from monkeys, significant evolution took place in our vocal cords for us to be able to produce these sounds. The evolution of voluntary vocal control was a key milestone in human evolution, enabling the development of language and complex vocal behaviors like singing. Yeah, you're so smart. But why is this the case? Thank you for asking. I do actually have the answer. LMC. Larynx, motor, cortex. This is the part of the brain responsible for controlling the muscles involved in vocalization, particularly those in the larynx, would you imagine? Interestingly, humans is actually split in two, or more accurately, it has two distinct parts. It has the dorsal, larynx motor cortex, which is crucial for modulating pitch and vocal cord movements. This is something that no other animals have. We also have the ventral LMC, which is closer to the one which is present in non-human primates, but it's still much more developed in humans. So this part of the brain underwent a lot of evolution. What is pretty incredible is that captive great apes, like orangutans, have been seen to actually spontaneously imitate human whistles, like whistle sounds that humans have made, i.e. voluntary control of vocal cords, and i.e. the ability to learn and/or imitate vocal patterns. There are even some instances of captive gorillas formulating rudimentary speech sounds, like phonemes. This has only been documented in great apes, which have grown up in captivity and so have grown up around these sounds. This doesn't really occur in the wild. But how would we know if it did? I digress. The fact of the matter is that somewhere along the line, our LMC has developed far beyond that of the great ape and now has two distinct regions which allow for us to have immense control over our vocal capabilities. Now, pinpointing exactly where in the evolutionary line this change happened or began to happen is a bit more difficult because we don't have access to early human brains, just their outsides. Oh, guys, I'm going to be so honest with you. I stayed up until 4 a.m. researching this. I just believe that if I searched in all corners of the internet like a wanderer traversing the desert with not a drop of rain, I would find someone, maybe like an oasis under the scorching sun, who recalls the exact moment that humans created language, which is impossible to do, by the way. You're probably thinking, yeah, no shit, Fig Tree. We weren't there, but never quit. 99% of academics walk away before they find the paper that proves 100% of their theory is correct. From what I could find, most linguists and archaeologists would place the first appearance of human language near the appearance of Homo sapiens, around 200,000 years ago. Some will say it was more like 40,000 years ago, at a time when Homo sapiens were much more culturally established. And at that time, we have evidence for instruments and art and things like that, which the existence of spoken language can be kind of inferred from. Because like, all right, you guys have instruments and you have art. I'm sure you're able to communicate effectively. I also found some people yapping about how Homo sapiens were the only Homo species to have developed at least some form of language, which I personally don't think is true. Look, okay, I wasn't there. I wasn't. But I find that hard to believe. There is anatomical evidence which suggests that Neanderthals, for example, had vocal tracts and auditory pathways very similar to that of Homo sapiens. So from that perspective, they were at least as capable as we are of producing sounds that could form language. Plus also we know that Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis intermixed and had babies with each other. So I would wager that implies at least a little bit of effective interspecies communication. It's safe to say sapiens probably had a higher caliber of language and were able to clearly develop it better, given that we're the only ones left. So if we make a 4 a.m. educated guesstimate and say that human language started to appear around 200,000 years ago, where does that place the origins of music and song? Well, maybe even earlier. It's likely that musicality was used by a wide range of hominin ancestors, not just sapiens. The vocalizations of apes and monkeys that we can observe today often have a very musical nature to them. Think of the duets, which are quote-unquote sung by gibbons who have been paired together. And these are likely very similar to those of our Pliocene ancestors. And it's this kind of musicality and vocalizations which could have eventually evolved into language, not the other way around. It was the enigmatic and esteemed Dr. Stephen Brown. I don't know if he's a doctor, I don't know if he's enigmatic or esteemed, but he created the model of music evolution and argued that the evolution of human music and language are deeply intertwined and actually developed from a common ancestor. And that singing and language aren't two entirely different forms of communication, but rather exist on a spectrum, with music on one side and spoken word on the other. Language is referential. Arbitrary sound patterns are used to convey a symbolic meaning. The words I'm saying to you now are imbued with a meaning that we have agreed upon so that we can understand each other. And music serves a much more emotive purpose. Particular sound patterns, either culture-specific or species-specific, are used to convey an emotional meaning. So while music and language are very distinct in the way they are performed, they share a deep commonality in their basic structure and function. In both music and language, the fundamental unit of communication is the phrase. A phrase is a structure which combines smaller units, phonemes or pitch in music, into larger meaningful sequences, and it weaves them all together. If you have a bunch of phonemes all together, you have a word and you have a sentence. If you have a bunch of pitches all together, you have a melody and then a song. In language, we have words and syntax. In music, we have melody and rhythm. Like I said earlier, the ability that humans have to control the pitch in their language is very unique. Because of this, it's very likely that early human languages relied a lot on tone. Over time, as humans developed more sophisticated ways of combining sounds, these tones and this tonal system would have diverged into the distinct groups of music and singing and language and speaking. While speech generally relies on alternating parts to communicate, i.e. I speak, you speak, I speak, you speak, so on and so forth. Music is simultaneous. It allows different elements to coexist through its ability to blend pitches. You can harmonize a vocalization, or you can all sing at the same time, and then when instruments come in, you're adding a whole other level. This vertical layering of sounds is really incredible when you think about how it could have been used as a form of group cohesion. It can really solidify interpersonal relationships where there isn't necessarily this hierarchy of the leader is speaking, you are listening. It's a completely group-oriented thing of we're all singing together. So it's highly possible, and I would be inclined to believe, that music and song has been a part of humanity for longer than language has. Music is social cohesion. You and I know this. Campfire songs, concerts, serenading your loved one. Music brings people together. We use it now how we probably used it in the past, to sing lullabies to babies and to soothe them, to communicate our emotions with the people around us. It can really, if you want to go into the psychologicalness of it all, it deepens the theory of mind and our ability to understand people as intentional beings with their own belief systems. And we know now how deeply entrenched music is in human culture. So it only makes sense that humans eventually would begin to construct tools to expand their musicality. They love doing that. They love the shit out of their tools. Pop quiz. What is this? Just kidding, I haven't told you yet. This is the femur of a young cave bear, initially interpreted as a fragment of a larger bone flute made by a Neanderthal. See the size and spacing of the holes here? They could definitely be used as finger holes. You know how you play a flute? Yeah, like that. When this was found, it was assumed that this was a flute made by Neanderthals. I so deeply want to believe that that's what this is, and a part of me does. Actually, all of me does, to be honest. However, in the interest of academic integrity, I do have to tell you guys that many archaeologists think that its ability to actually produce musical tones is merely coincidental, and the holes in it are the result of non-hominin animal damage. A lot of bones in the cave this bone was found in belonged to cave bears, so it's not necessarily out of place. And researchers argued that the holes here indicate that it had been gripped in an animal's jaws. Tunis et al. Actually clapped back on that and said most of the animal-made abrasions that you see on the bone were actually post-depositional, meaning they happened after the creation of this artifact. A reconstruction of the bone flute shows that the original bone object could achieve 2.5 octaves in a tune sequence of a 12-tone scale. And they could create a lot of different kinds of musicality. And the musical capabilities are actually very similar to those of a modern-day flute. So maybe it's coincidence, but I don't believe in coincidences. And there is, as of yet, no general kind of consensus, but I find it unlikely that the bone didn't have any human interaction at all. It is possible that it was gnawed at by animals, and that's what kind of gives it all these abrasions and stuff, and then was perhaps found by a curious Neanderthal who picked it up and modified it a little bit in order to create a musical instrument. I think that's probably the most likely cause of events. What is less contentiously agreed upon as the first real evidence of a human musical instrument is this: a flute from Germany. Many flutes just like this have been found around the northwest of Europe and are mostly made from bird bones, predominantly the radius or ulna of a vulture, and also some found in swan bones, with a few actually being made in mammoth ivory, which is extremely impressive. These bone flutes appear from 40,000 years ago onwards. This flute, which is the earliest of its kind that we have, was made from a vulture radius. It's 21.8 centimeters long. The end of the bone, as you can see here, was carved to form 2 V shapes. This is presumably so that it would function better as a mouth hole that you could blow into. And the placements of the finger holes were all measured. They're the exact same length apart. So this suggests that this aspect of the flute was made with something in mind, like a scale. Some reconstructions of this flute show that a wide range of tones were possible. And this is a fully developed musical instrument. It's a flute. You're playing a whole melody on here. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Now, like I said, the earliest that we see these flutes is 40,000 years ago. But the sophistication of their construction suggests a very long history of musical technological production. They didn't just start making this and they made a perfect flute. No. There must have been several trial and error stages. They would have had to make them very rudimentary at first. They must be several conceptual stages removed from the earliest origins, even of instrumental music expression, to say nothing of those universal, vocal, manual, percussive, and dance forms which must have existed independently of and before any need for such tools. That's what I'm saying. But okay, so if obviously these aren't the first musical instruments, why are they the first ones that we have? Why don't we have anything predating this that we can trace the evolution of human musicality? There's a couple of reasons. First of all, it's likely that we start seeing these around 40,000 years ago because that is the time that they started being made out of things like bone and ivory. It's very possible that flutes of this nature were made in much more perishable forms like wood. It just wouldn't survive 40,000 years long enough for us to find them. And that the musical nature of humans is quite extensive before 40,000 years ago, but is just lost to the archaeological record. Also, these flutes have only been found in Europe, and it's highly unlikely that they weren't made prior to humans leaving Africa and migrating into Europe. However, when humans migrated into Europe, they started to live in caves in Europe, and the dampness and protection that these caves offered would have allowed for musical instruments to be preserved. Ancient humans were certainly capable of musicality and of creating musical instruments before they appear in the archaeological record. And let's talk about those ivory flutes again, because compared to making flutes out of bird bone, making flutes out of ivory is much more difficult. This requires a lot more skill and precision and a lot more hard work. Vulture and swan, like arm bones, are already hollow, and they're already quite a natural size for something like a flute, as well as being light and sturdy. Ivory, on the other hand, is oversized, it's layered, it's tough to work with. And ivory flute production requires that a section of ivory must be sawn to the correct length. It must then be sawn in half along its length. The core layers must be removed, and then the two halves of the flute must be refitted and bound together with a bonding substance, which must create an airtight seal in order for the pipe to produce a sound. I'm telling you right now, I couldn't do that. These ivory flutes showing up in the archaeological record at the same time as these bone flutes just proves that they were making this well before 40,000 years ago. They knew exactly what they were doing when they were making these. They had got it to a point where they were perfect at it. And it's just now that we're seeing them. It's likely that music played a very large role in the lives of early humans. That just makes me so happy, because sometimes when I'm listening to music and I'm staring up at the night sky, I could just be a Neanderthal listening to my friends play me the flute. It's an experience that I'm so happy humans in the past have had, because I can relate to them in some aspect. If ancient humans had the capacity to listen to a song over and over and over and over and over again, like I do, I just know they would. I just want to get Spotify Premium for my baddies in the Pliocene. As many human groups switched from nomadic and forager to sedentary societies, i.e. societies with farming and agriculture, it's likely that their music grew and evolved as well. This agricultural shift, also called the Neolithic Revolution, enabled larger population sizes and much greater social complexity. Major walled settlements arose about 8,000 years ago, and in time, pottery and writing, metalworking would all become core aspects of human existence. Now, living in more densely packed societies, working jobs, this all creates stress, which I'm sure you and I can attest to. Music, much like it does now, would be a source of relief in these societies. Once again, it would encourage social bonding and would be a time to cool off after a day of working for the man. And it perhaps plays an even more important social role, because as opposed to these forager societies where you would know pretty much everyone that you were living with, in these bigger sedentary cultures where society is beginning to form, you might not be well acquainted with all your neighbors and everyone in the town. And so music, again, brings people together. And if you think about how easy it is to bond with someone that you share music commonalities with, whether it's you both like the same artist and you can talk for hours and hours about how incredible that artist is. And with musical instruments becoming more sophisticated, they also became more of a skill that you had to learn. It would seem that a divide would form between the musician and the audience. Actually being able to play music was a skill that you could cultivate. Neolithic bone flutes were discovered in graves unearthed in China and have been dated to around 7,000 years ago. These flutes were tuned to roughly one whole tone. The ancient Egyptians had a very archaeologically visible music life. Music was very associated with showing your power. It had a lot of religious connotations. There's a lot of art that we have in the archaeological record depicting musical instruments in ancient Egypt, which also depict the performers of this music in very high esteem, including some of them being royal figures or deities. And over a quarter of all the tombs at the necropolis found at the site of the city of Thebes are decorated with iconography of music making. Drums, harps, lutes, cymbals. These are called sistrum. They're like shakers, like tambourines, trumpets, clapping sticks. These all appear in the archaeological record from about 1800 BC. Just to skip over the pond into ancient Mesopotamia, my favorite place in the world, archaeologists have unearthed lyres and harps that date back to 3000 BC. Highly decorated lyres were found in the Royal Cemetery of Ur, which are dated to around 2300 BC. And something so incredible is that cuneiform tablets, which have been dated to around 2600 BC, have been found which list musical instruments and actually give instruction on how to play them, which can be argued is our first ever sign of musical notation. These are just incredible. We get these dancing girl statuettes found in India, which are from around 2500 BC, and the Indian goddess Saraswati found in almost all depictions of ancient Indian religion from around 1000 BC onwards is always depicted holding a musical instrument called a vina. Way up north, during the Nordic Bronze Age, which is roughly 1700 BC, bronze lures, which are like these long curved trumpets, appear in Scandinavian and Baltic records. In China, we have a record going back to 1000 BC with the stringed zither. According to like oral tradition, this actually dates back to closer to 3000 BC, but we don't have any material evidence for that. The ancient Greeks and Romans had a very extensive musical life. It was very pervasive, very much entrenched in ancient Greek and Roman culture. Their expression of music would include orchestras and choruses, as well as soloist musicians. Lutes, lyres, and harps have been found, which even then would be so understood and worked on so much that they would be split into distinct categories. Like, for example, the ancient Greeks distinguished between the box lyres and the bowl lyres, which would create a different array of sounds. Music accompanied a lot of dramatic performances, as well as feasts and private ceremonies and festivals, very importantly. It was something that was even offered up to the gods, and musicians, talented musicians, were highly revered in Greek society. Even domestic personal music making that would just happen in your house to your family was a pastime that was well accepted and popular. What I find really interesting is the way that this allowed for women to express their emotions and their dreams. In ancient Greece, women were not allowed to vote. They weren't allowed to practice reason like the men in their symposiums. Because of this, music became the way that women would express themselves. And they could talk about their thoughts about the world and about what was going on for them and their own philosophies in a way that wasn't necessarily geared by men. Sappho is a great example of this. She's a very, very famous ancient Greek poet. All of her poems that we have today would actually have been accompanied by lyre music. They were songs, really, more than poems back in ancient Greece. And she has some incredible lyricism which ponders many things that men would have also been pondering but wouldn't have allowed the women into their conversations about, like love and God and stuff like that. And all of this started hundreds of thousands of years ago when humans were able to create those vocalizations which became music, which became language, and in turn they molded their music to the musical instruments they would create. And now today we have it's a woman's world. And I'm so grateful that our entire history of music evolution has led us to that. You know, I once met someone who told me to my face, this was like a grown adult, that they had never found a genre of music that they liked and music didn't do anything for them emotionally. What the fuck? I'm sorry, that is outside of the human experience. I don't know what that is. Every single thing in the world could be going awfully. And I listen to my favorite song and I'm like, at least I can listen to this. Like, at least I exist in a time where I can listen to music. But as we've discussed, maybe there was never a time when humans couldn't listen to music or experience it in some way. Because not everyone can hear things, but there's still like avenues to experience music even without your ears. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's my take on music and its evolution and its history. If you have anything you'd like to add, don't add it. Anyway, my neighbor has been sawing a tree in half, I guess, for the last 30 minutes. So I'm really sorry if you can hear that, and I should go because it's doing my head in. Have a lovely day. I hope this was informative to you. Thanks also for 2,000 subscribers. That's cool. I'm gonna make you all something and send it to you because I appreciate you watching me. Okay, bye.